Hi there, my name is Bernadette Smith. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I've found is that there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for DEI stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these inclusive actions and policies within your own organization to help you build a more inclusive world. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Therese Canaris, physician and All right. Matthew, we're going to have to re-record this one. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Therese Canaris, physician and CEO founder of CuriDX. This week, our conversation is about FDA's new policy on gay and bisexual men donating blood, Sesame Street's first Filipino character, and more. Let's get started. Will you please introduce yourself?
Hi, Bernadette. I am so thrilled to be here. So thank you for having me. Again, my name is Therese Canaris. I'm a pediatric emergency medicine physician at Johns Hopkins and also CEO and founder of CuriDX, where we are creating point-of-care tests for telehealth using just a cell phone picture.
I am so excited about your new business, and you and I are friends, so I've heard about it. But will you tell the audience a little bit more? I mean, that was, by the way, a perfect elevator pitch. But let's get into it a little bit more.
Sure. Well, I'm very passionate about it, so happy to share. This all started with, well, let me ask you, Bernadette, do you know that moment when you start getting sick and how that feels?
Yes. I've been feeling that on and off over the past month or so. Yes.
Yeah. It's that sinking feeling of sometimes it's achiness, sore throat. For me, it's also a layer of panic and not panic about being sick, but I don't have time to be sick. And I see this every day in the ER. I see families coming in, rushing in, just wanting to know what's wrong. And they spend hours and $100 copays just to end up being told maybe it's a virus and Tylenol and Motrin will help you get better and it'll pass. And what I've realized is I think families, patients, everyone wants that autonomy to be able to find out what's wrong. And COVID showed us that home tests give so much power and autonomy to us as individuals. So what we're doing is we're creating screening tests using just a cell phone picture. We're starting with strep throat. So you can take a picture of your throat and it will give you a screening prediction on whether or not you have strep throat. And that'll hopefully guide whether you need to go to the doctor or whether you need antibiotics.
Well, what I love about this is that, I mean, I personally see the equity connection here, right? Because we know here in the US, there's no universal health care. And there are a lot of low income folks, people with really high deductibles and copays, for whom not only taking the time, but spending the money to go see a doctor for something simple is just like out of the question. And so it's really an important life. I just think it's so important for folks to help improve healthcare outcomes.
100%. So in my clinical job, I work in East Baltimore, and we see a lot of families in the East Baltimore community. And in that population, I have patients and parents who they may be working 3 part-time jobs just to make ends meet. And jobs like that, where you're getting paid hourly, you don't have salary, you don't have all these days off. So what are they doing? They're coming in when they have that little bit of time. It ends up being Friday night. That's the only time they can get in, or they don't have transportation. So they're waiting and suffering at home, or coming in whenever they can get a ride or a lift. So there's so many components of equity that speak to what happens when you're acutely ill.
Well, what I appreciate is that you found a really creative way to close this gap. And, you know, something we don't talk about on this show very often, hardly at all, truly, is healthcare disparities. And we know that Black folks in particular and BIPOC folks more broadly have poorer health outcomes than people like me. And I see this as a really fantastic opportunity to, again, to help sort of bridge that gap. And you know what? We have to kind of take it into our own hands. I like how you took it into your own hands, because it's not something that the government is going to provide.
Yes, well, that's the fun of innovation, and all of this work came from my research at Johns Hopkins, where it's an environment of innovation and research. And so, you're right that it's hard sometimes to create new ideas, new concepts when you're purely relying on government funding, and that's where like great ideas and the resources of an academic institution can, create something like this.
I love it. So in the work that you're doing, both in the hospital and with your business, what about it is giving you hope right now?
Well, I am someone who's really excited about the future, and I see a ton of potential in technology. So our core product is driven by AI, which I know has a lot of connotations and perceptions. There's certainly a lot in the news right now about ChatGPT and what are its limitations. I know that there are some who worry about what are the risks with AI. The way I look at it is more, what are all the opportunities where it can elevate us as humans, where it can, and on the clinician side, how can innovative things like AI help us be better doctors, help us be better diagnosticians, even save some of our cognitive effort so we can spend more effort on just empathy. So I think just the future of what AI and technology hold, that's what gives me hope.
That's amazing. I love it. And what I love is that your perspective on things is so different from every guest I've ever had on this show. So it's just, and I love our guests. I really do. But I just love hearing this additional perspective on things. So in this past week's newsletter, I wrote about my experience recently over the past few months playing pickleball for the first time and actually getting my butt whooped in pickleball by people who are 10, 15 years older than me. And what I love is that playing pickleball has reminded me or let me know that I'm ageist, right? Because I had some swagger going in. I think I can get this. No, as a beginner, I definitely routinely got myself whooped. And I think it's a beautiful thing because I love constantly learning and being reminded of what I don't know and being reminded of my own bias. Now, so I just wrote about this as sort of the kickoff to this past week's 5 things. Is there any part of of what I just described that you can relate to related to ageism?
Bernadette, I am an eternal victim of ageism. When I was 18, I looked 13. When I graduated from med school and became officially a doctor, people were asking if I was still in high school. And this is still an ongoing challenge for me to be in a position where, especially in the clinical role and also now in the CEO role, where I'm in a leadership position and I'm in a position where I'm making large, major, important decisions. And I am constantly feeling like I have to validate my credentials and establish my credibility. There's a story once. I was getting on a bus, a Peter Pan bus, to go to the airport, and I had my backpack on because it was a trip. And the bus driver stopped me and said, "Hang on, where are your parents?" And I said, "At home." And he goes, "Well, hang on there, because under 13, you need a permission slip." And I was like, I'm 30.
Wow. You're going to be getting carded for a long time. That's funny. So you've been on the flip side of ageism.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It's not in certain, I know a lot of people value looking young and youthful skin, but there are downsides to it, especially depending on what role you're in and what effect you want to have.
Yeah, it's certainly not so harmful on the pickleball court. Plus, now I've learned a thing or two. Okay, let's get into this week's Good Vibes. The first story this week comes from Sesame Street, which has been in 5 things quite a bit. Well, this time, Sesame Street introduces TJ, the show's first Filipino-American Muppet. what I love about this is that not only is the Muppet created by a Filipino-American animator, but portrayed by voice actor and puppeteer Yunnan Shentu. It's just great for representation. What do you think? You're Filipino, right? Filipino-American?
Yes, yes. So my mom is an immigrant from the Philippines. I was born and raised in Maryland, and I was raised by my mom's side of the family and raised in a Filipino household. So I love this story and what Sesame Street is doing for representation, because to me, a huge part of the American story and being Asian American is the idea that this is a place where so many cultures come together. And being Asian in the United States doesn't necessarily mean that you yourself were the immigrant. And I know a lot of friends who are of Asian descent, but they may be third or fourth generation. And so there's this beautiful melding of cultures where being Asian American is a combination of all of your American and cultural things that we get just living here in this country, combined with all of your ancestry and heritage and all the things that your family teaches you and passes down. I also have two daughters who are 3/4 Filipino and 1/4 white American, and it's a challenge for me to teach them what it means to be Filipino and Filipino American. And I mean, lately the extent of it is we eat white rice every day in our rice cooker.
Yeah.
That's like a little piece of like culture that is sort of ingrained into our home. But there's so much more to being Filipino that I just can't or don't have the capacity to teach them. So an opportunity like this, where they're seeing a version of themselves, of a Filipino American Muppet on TV, I mean, that's just a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah, your youngest is Sesame Street age, right?
Yes.
I love it. That's great. I'm glad this is something that can help them feel more represented and seen and in media. Okay, the second story comes from the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, which has made it easier for gay and bisexual men to donate blood. So up until now, basically, gay men have been banned from blood donations, which obviously means that a whole lot of folks that there's not a lot of there are a whole lot of folks who can't donate blood, which obviously can impact the supply. Well, they have the FDA has finally eased the bans by saying that gay and bisexual men in monogamous relationships can donate blood without abstaining from sex. So this brings the U.S. up to the U.K. and Canada in terms of policy. About time, huh?
We should celebrate it as a step forward. So I think as far as changing policy and recognizing how hard it is to change age-old, generations-old policies, that level of momentum that's needed to change a policy is remarkable. So we should celebrate that. I have a couple of perspectives on this. One, as a clinician, I transfuse my patients with blood regularly. As the clinician, I'm not really thinking about where did this blood come from. Maybe the patients may as a recipient of blood, but there's a certain level of trust that we put into our healthcare system that the appropriate levels of screenings and infectious disease and communicable disease testing has been done. And so I trust the institution that I work at. I trust our blood bank, and I know that they do a remarkable job administering blood safely. However, thinking about this, especially with that DEI lens of why are we discriminating based on sexual orientation and relationships, that just seems irrelevant. I understand that there are certain acts and behaviors that can increase the risk of HIV transmission, but that's not necessarily specific to homosexual people or men who have sex with men. And even 1/4 of new HIV diagnoses are not from in homosexual people. It's in heterosexual people. So I think there are behaviors that heterosexual people do too. So it's really what I worry about in this policy. It's isolating orientation and personal details that are not the true risk factor that we should be screening for.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So the risk factor that's being screened for now is sexual behavior, and recent partners, and other factors as well, as opposed to just being a man who has sex with man.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of work still to do, but in here on Five Things, we celebrate the incremental
Yeah.
bits of progress as well. Okay, this next story also comes from the healthcare system, which is a nice model from Dartmouth Health, which is a New England-based healthcare company. What I love that they've done is they've implemented measures to mitigate bias during the executive search process. So the goal here is to have an upstream approach to ultimately provide equitable healthcare outcomes. So candidates are required to submit a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement alongside their resume, and that carries equal weight during the process. The selection process is also blind with identifying information removed. And there's a lot more. We'll make sure we put the article in the chat and the show notes for you. But it's a great blueprint that I would love to see other healthcare systems getting on board with, because ultimately this is about, again, improving patient outcomes. And there's a lot of healthcare disparities that show up, racial healthcare disparities in particular.
Mm-hmm. So I love this, that both components, that they're blinding the reviewers to the candidates, because I think that speaks volumes about removing layers of bias. And I appreciate that DEI statement that they're obliged to submit. Having written those statements myself, I worry sometimes that for some individuals, it's like, I promise I will do this. I pledge I will do that. And it's hard to know if that statement is truly reflecting one's personal values. And I think the best evidence for that is there a history of implementing the change or the DEI values that you stand for? So I think that having a statement is a step in the right direction. So we celebrate the win. But I would also love to see how that correlates to um, actual, past behavior or outcomes, or um, like historical efforts in implementing DEI policies.
Well, especially now that Chat GPT can probably whip up a DEI statement in about 30 seconds or less. I think that's a fair point. But check out the article, folks, because there's a lot more that they're doing specifically around the hiring committee as well to improve this process. Good vibe. But of course, most of these stories, as we've talked about before on the show, are a yes and. Okay, the fourth story this week comes from Airbnb, which last year created a live and work anywhere policy that allows staff to work from any location worldwide for up to 90 days per country. And about 20% of employees are taking advantage of this program. But what I love is that the business has actually never performed better, according to the CFO. And this is really important for folks, particularly women and folks from underrepresented groups who are more likely to face microaggressions in the workplace, have a lower income, and so they might be less likely to live in expensive places like Airbnb's headquarters in the Bay Area.
What I love about this is, in an indirect way, this supports women who work, and women with families who work. Um, just talking to some of my friends, I have a lot of physician friends who have a partner and kids, and despite having a profession and a career, and often having a spouse with a career, the trend that I've seen even among my colleagues is the woman of the couple, in hetero couples, still tends to take on the childbearing responsibilities. Some of it is the raising things when they're young. Some of it is, they're sick from school. Who's going to pick them up? In the hetero couple, it's the woman, it's the mom. And so policies like these, where it creates that flexibility to get the work done, but get it done in a way that also enables having a family life and having a personal life. I think that is how a company supports women and moms who work. So I think it's beautiful.
Absolutely. And the last story this week also is a healthcare story. So I really lucked out with you as my guest this week, Therese. The last story is about an Ohio nurse practitioner who developed a breath-controlled video game called Easy Induction that helps children relax when going under anesthesia for surgery. So the video game involves children putting the anesthesia mask on and start breathing into it, which then blows up a little balloon that wakes up all the animals in the game. So it's been tested on hundreds of patients at Cincinnati Children's Hospital and is now licensed for other hospitals. You must see a lot of kids who struggle with anesthesia, I would imagine.
Yes, and we do sedations in our ER. It's not general anesthesia like in the operating room, but very similar to this. I love this for so many reasons. This is just another example of innovation that comes out of a need and seeing what patients go through and creating something that helps them. I've seen a few variations of this, some with virtual reality, and I think it's a beautiful way to support patients and sort of gamify, to some extent, gamify the experience, and also introducing biofeedback without labeling it as you are going to undergo biofeedback right now. So creating it where it meets patients and kids where they're at, that's a win. That's beautiful.
I love it. I love it. All right. Fantastic. Well, this week's call to action, folks, is to watch the PBS special Rising Against Asian Hate, narrated by Sandra Oh. So we're going to put this link in the chat to that documentary. And Therese, how can folks find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Oh, thank you for asking. Probably the best way is our company's website, curiedx.com. That's CURIEDX.com. There's a way to sign up to get on our mailing list and reach out to us directly there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me this week. And thank you everyone for watching or listening. And if you don't already subscribe to the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Have a great week. Take care.
Thank you.